You know, we all know the story of the Titanic. It's legendary. But what if I told you there was another disaster, just 2 years later, that actually claimed more passenger lives? This is the incredible and tragic story of a ship that history, well, it almost completely forgot. The RMS Empress of Ireland.
So let's set the scene. It's a gorgeous spring evening, May 28, 1914. The Empress of Ireland, this absolute jewel of the Canadian Pacific Fleet, is pulling away from Quebec City, heading for Liverpool. You've got 1,477 people on board. Families, Salvation Army members on their way to a huge conference, immigrants with new hopes, and of course, the seasoned crew. The sky is clear, the mood is light, it's just another routine trip across the Atlantic. Or, so it seemed.
And those were the last words the river pilot said as he left the ship. Just a simple, off-the-cuff comment. But it would become one of the most chillingly ironic statements in maritime history, because lying in wait, just down the river, was a wall of fog that was about to change absolutely everything.
Out on that massive, dark river, two very different ships were moving through the night. They were on a collision course, but neither crew had any idea. One was this floating palace, a symbol of Edwardian luxury. The other was a tough-as-nails workhorse, built for a much grittier job.
Okay, so let's get to know our two main players here. On one side, you have the Empress of Ireland. We're talking 14,000 tons of pure elegance, grand dining rooms, a library, the whole 9 yards. And then you have the SS Storstad. Smaller, sure, but way tougher. A Norwegian coal ship designed to do one thing: haul coal. And here's the critical detail. It had a reinforced bow, specially designed to break through ice. In the fog that was about to roll in, that special bow would become a deadly spear.
Now, the man in charge of the Empress, Captain Henry George Kendall, was not your average sea captain. This guy was a legitimate celebrity. I mean, he'd already survived other shipwrecks, and he was famous for using the brand new wireless radio to help catch a notorious killer on the run. So if you're a passenger, you're feeling pretty darn safe with this guy on the bridge.
So how do we get from a calm, beautiful departure to total catastrophe? Well, that pilot's prediction about clear skies couldn't have been more wrong. A dense, blinding fog bank suddenly appeared on the river, swallowing both ships and setting the stage for one of the fastest, most terrifying sinkings you can imagine.
Okay, just look at this timeline. It is absolutely bone-chilling. At 1:30 in the morning, the two ships can see each other's lights. The weather is clear. But just moments later, that fog slams in. Ship whistles are blowing back and forth, engines are stopped, but it's pure chaos in the mist. At around 1:56 a.m., the Storstad plows into the side of the Empress, and by 2:10 a.m., she's just gone.
14 minutes. Let that sink in. The unsinkable Titanic took over 2.5 hours to go down. This massive ocean liner, the Empress of Ireland, vanished beneath the waves of the St. Lawrence River in less than a quarter of an hour. Most of the passengers were asleep in their bunks. They had no time. No chance, really.
So how on earth could a modern ship sink that fast? It was just this catastrophic domino effect. The Storstad's ice-breaking bow ripped a hole the size of a billboard in its side. Water gushed in, flooding the engine rooms, which immediately killed all the power. The whole ship went black, and because the power was out, the electronic watertight doors couldn't be closed. Then, as the ship started to tilt violently, water poured in through hundreds of open portholes, and that severe angle made it impossible to launch half the lifeboats. Literally everything that could go wrong did.
And in that freezing darkness, as the few stunned survivors were pulled from the water, the question was already hanging in the air. Who was responsible for this? What came next was a tidal wave of grief, of confusion, and two completely different stories about what happened in the fog.
And this right here is the heart of the mystery. Captain Kendall of the Empress swore up and down that he had brought his ship to a complete stop and that the Storstad just inexplicably turned and smashed into him. But the crew of the Storstad? They had a totally different story. They claimed they were on a safe course to pass when the Empress suddenly cut right across their bow. The two accounts they cannot both be true.
So of course, there was an official inquiry, led by Lord Mersey. And get this, he was the same guy who investigated the Titanic sinking. After listening to all this conflicting testimony, the court put the blame squarely on the Storstad. They found its first officer had been negligent and changed course in the fog. So, case closed, right? Well, not really. The debate among historians has never truly stopped. But beyond all the finger-pointing, there's the human cost. And this chart, it tells a devastating story. Almost 60% of the crews survived. They were awake, on deck, and they knew the layout of the ship. But for the passengers, most of them sound asleep in their cabins below deck, the survival rate was just over 20%.
But the most gut-wrenching number of all has to do with the youngest passengers. That night, there were 138 children on board the Empress of Ireland.
And of those 138 children, only 4 were saved. Just 4. That single fact, more than anything else, really drives home the sheer horror of what happened in those 14 minutes. In the end, 1,012 people lost their lives, making it the worst maritime disaster in Canadian history.
Which brings us to the biggest question of all. With more passenger deaths than the Titanic, why has the Empress of Ireland become this footnote in history? Why is it so often called Canada's forgotten Titanic?
Well, the answer seems to be a perfect storm of really, really bad timing. The Empress was tragically sandwiched right between 2 other massive maritime stories. Then, just a few months later, World War I breaks out, and the world's attention just completely shifts to a global tragedy on an even bigger scale. And unlike the famous millionaires on the Titanic, the victims here were mostly ordinary people, immigrants and middle-class families, whose stories, sadly, were easier for history to overlook.
Today, the Empress of Ireland is still down there, resting in the cold, dark waters of the St. Lawrence. It's now a protected National Historic Site, an underwater grave, really, and a solemn memorial to the 1,012 souls who were lost in just 14 fatal minutes.
The story of the Empress of Ireland is a powerful reminder that history isn't just about what we remember, but also about the stories we've somehow let slip away. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge stories are out there just waiting to be rediscovered?